Long ago, long back before modern history, there lived a legendary blacksmith. Muthuy was his name, and he was on top of his game. He enjoyed the blessings of the ancestors, for he came from a long lineage of legendary blacksmiths. The hunters used to say, if you use Muthuy's arrows, you could aim at a squirrel with your eyes closed and you wouldn't miss. He lived in the lush green Kilungu Hills. In those days, animals roamed freely in the land and nobody lacked anything because they only hunted for what they needed for their daily sustenance. To the south, in the sprawling grassland, lived a tall, rugged, warlike people known as the Akavi. They used to believe that all the cattle in the land belonged to them. One serene morning, when everybody was asleep, the Akavi struck and they raided Utangwa village, carried away all their cattle. The people of Utangwa sent emissaries to Muthuy. They said to him, "We hear that you are very good at making arrows. The other day, the Akavi came and raided all our cattle, and we must go back and recover them. Could you please make us some arrows?" Muthuy was a generous, friendly man, but he also had a keen sense of business. He saw the prospect of making a lot of wealth from this deal, and therefore he agreed. The next day, very early, when it was still dark, before the weaver birds started chirping away as if to serenade the rising sun, when it was so dark that you could mistake the short, stout stumps for vicious hyenas, Muthuy and their emissaries started on their way to Utangwa land. It took a whole day to get there, and in the evening, Muthuy was too tired, and after dinner, he went to sleep. Early the next morning, Muthuy woke up, and before breakfast, which was sweet potatoes and porridge, he was already setting up his forge and pounding away. You could hear as the hammer pounded the red-hot iron. He worked tirelessly from sunup to sundown, and he made beautiful arrows like had never been seen in Utangwa land. When Muthuy left his home, his wife was heavy with child. And in his long absence, his wife went into labor in the middle of the night all by herself. Nearby, in a thick forest, was an ogre that was foraging for food. He heard the feeble cries of Muthuy's wife, and he came closer to the window and listened. He heard the feeble cry of a woman, and shortly the cry of a baby. "Ah! Ah! Ah!" The ogre said to himself, "Today, I'm going to eat. I'll eat the woman and the baby." The ogre rushed into the house, took the baby, took the wife, and all their possessions, and he put them in a gigantic ogre bag, and he headed to his home deep in the forest. When he got there, he confided Muthuy's wife and the baby, and every day he would go hunt. He would come back with game meat, and he would prepare delicious food, put it before the woman, and her, too scared even to look at it. And then he would say to the woman, "Are you hungry?" She wouldn't respond, too scared to respond. "Are you hungry?" "I am." And then he would take the food, eat all of it, and the calabash as well. And then he would come back to her again. "Are you hungry?" "I am not." And this went on and on and on. And he watched the woman and the baby as they became weaker and weaker, and he told himself, one day, I'm going to eat them. In the meantime, he used to go out and come back. One day, when he left to forage for food, Muthuy's wife noticed a little dove perched on a tree next to where she was. She decided to send a message to her husband, Muthuy, through the dove, and she began to sing. Blacksmith, you're toiling, Sangalalisa. Your wife has given birth, Sangalalisa. And ogre says ha, Sangalalisa. He prepares food and eats all of it, Sangalalisa. She uploaded the message. The dove picked it and took off to go and look for Muthuy. After a whole day, the dove finally arrived at Utangwa land, where Muthuy was. He saw a low-hanging branch. He perched there, and he began to recite the message. Blacksmith, you're toiling, Sangalalisa. Your wife has given birth, Sangalalisa. Muthuy, upon hearing this, said, that message must be for me. He drew closer and he listened. Your wife has given birth, Sangalalisa. An ogre nurses her, Sangalalisa. He prepares the food and eats all of it, Sangalalisa. Upon hearing that, he abandoned his work, laid down his tools, and he darted for his home like an arrow. Upon getting there, he went straight to the corner of the hut where he kept his special quiver of arrows. These arrows had been treated by the village medicine man. They could listen to Muthuy's voice. He could instruct them, and they went like a guided missile, targeting the target, and they could whiz, cut through corners, and target the exact subject. He took the quiver, made of leopard skin, strapped it on his shoulder, and he took his bow, and he started on his way, guided by the dove, flying above him and singing, Blacksmith, you're toiling, Sangalalisa. And as they went, the birds of the air heard them, and they joined in. Your wife has given birth, Sangalalisa. The animals of the land joined in the race, and they went up the mountains, down the rivers, across the valleys, finally arriving at the forest where was the ogre's house. At the center of the forest, there was a big clearing. It was the size of 5 villages put together. At the center of it, a gigantic ogre house. The size of the doorpost was tall as 5 mature eucalyptus trees. The size of the window as big as a mature male elephant. As they wondered at the spectacle, the ground where they stood suddenly started shaking. And through the trees, they could see an ogre approaching. He was angry, and as he came, he uprooted the trees and threw them away. He got closer and closer, and up at the center of what they figured should be the face, there was a single red eye. The ogre advanced, and the brave warriors that had accompanied Muthuy pulled out their arrows, and they started firing, one after another. The ogre's skin was as tough as a rock, and the arrows bounced off, letting off sparks in all directions. They kept on firing. Ultimately, their arrows were depleted. They stood there, shaken, scared, sweating, and the ogre kept on advancing. Muthuy, who was standing at the back, stepped to the front. He pulled out his magic arrow, loaded it on the bow, and he aimed. He whispered something to the arrow, and he released it. It went up, round the trees, whizzing through, up the canopy, and it angled, aiming directly at the red eye of the ogre. Bullseye. I guess you can say ogre's eye. The ogre let out a big scream and suddenly started to shrink. And he became smaller and smaller and smaller, and finally, at 9 feet, he collapsed to the ground in a heap, dead. Muthuy's wife was elated. She dashed out of the hut. In her hands, she was holding her bundle of joy, a beautiful baby boy. With the cooperation of the dove that uploaded a message, took it to Muthuy, with the moral support of the birds of the air, the animals of the forest, they rescued, perhaps, just perhaps, another great Muthuy in a long list of legendary blacksmiths. Ladies and gentlemen, you can pick many lessons and morals from that story. I remember my father telling us that story many times as we sat around the dinner table. I drew many lessons from it every time, ranging from teamwork, bravery, and many others. Take a trip down memory lane to when you were a child. You remember the stories they told you? What impact did they have on you? How did they shape your view of the world? How did they contribute to who you are today? Fast forward to today. When was the last time you told a child a story? To inspire, to educate, to entertain. Why have we stopped telling stories? I'll tell you why. We have become too busy. The internet and the mass media have filled the gap of family time and storytelling. With that, they have wreaked havoc by inverting and subverting our culture and our morals. Our young people are being fed with cultures, with morals, with stories that are alien to our culture. The education system cannot fix this. The school tries to approach children through the front door of logic. But children don't have their minds exercised to appreciate logic. Ravi Zacharias of Atlanta, Georgia said, if you cannot approach a person through the front side of logic and reason, you have the option of using the back door of the imagination. Albert Einstein was right when he said, imagination is more important than knowledge, because knowledge is limited, but imagination can go around the world and cause an evolution. Legislation will not solve it. Our politicians need to make less laws, and they need to tell more stories. Patricia Fripp, a storytelling coach, says it. Stories are the currency of human contact. Through a well-told story, you can have unfettered access to the mind of a person. Can everybody tell stories? Absolutely. You just need to understand the structure of a good story. A good story needs a moral or a lesson. A good story has a plot, and the plot is the journey of a main character. Once you have a theme or a moral for your story, and you have a main character that goes through a journey, you need to keep it simple by minimizing the number of supporting characters. In our story of Muthuy the blacksmith, we had Muthuy, we had his wife, we had the dove, and we had the other animals coming in terms of groups of similar kinds of people. This limits the complexity of your story, and it is easy to follow from start to finish. Stories are the currency of human contact. If we all, one and all, can rise up, become storytellers, we can influence our upcoming generation through the back door of the imagination, through the telling of stories which have a moral, which will instill in them the exact kind of things that we want them to have. If we all can one and all arise, become storytellers, we can change the world by telling them one story at a time. Thank you.